to another episode of the Inspiring Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Pursue, a bespoke leadership coaching and development company with a mission to create, nurture and develop inspiring leadership across the global education sector and beyond. My name is Nicholas Mackay, Associate Professor, Certified Professional Coach and Director of Pursue, and I'll be your host as we bring you cutting-edge leadership stories from across the world, delving into the minds of recognised education and industry experts to find out about the challenges and main issues they are facing and to gain insights into inspiring leadership. In this series, we are proud to be in partnership with Independent School Management Plus and International School Magazine, the leading authority and voice for professionals in independent and international education worldwide. If you'd like to watch the video of today's podcast, please head over to schoolmanagementplus.com. We are also supported by Fabisia, the Federation of British International Schools in Asia, a diverse and inclusive community of 78 leading British international schools spanning 18 countries across the Asia region. So let's get on with today's episode, in which we turn our sights to aviation, and I'm delighted to welcome Mandy Hickson. Mandy has over 30 years experience within aviation. She joined the Royal Air Force in 1994 and flew the Tornado GR4 on the front line, where she operated in hostile environments, including patrolling the no-fly zone over Iraq. Since leaving the RAF, she retrained as a facilitator and coach in human performance factors, drawing on her experience of calculated risk-taking, decision-making under pressure, and the critical role of the human in the system. She transfers vivid lessons from the cockpit to other management and leadership contexts. Mandy is now a highly demanded keynote speaker across a range of business sectors, where she talks with humour and great passion to inspire those around her. She's been invited to share her insights with some of the most successful organisations across the world, where she describes the strategies and behaviours that can be adopted when the stakes are at their highest. She has recently launched her best-selling book, An Officer, Not a Gentleman, her inspirational journey to become a pioneering female fighter pilot. Mandy, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Nicholas. I'd better be humorous and passionate then, hadn't I?
I'm setting you up here to be absolutely fantastic, Mandy.
No problem at all. No worries.
So I'm obviously really interested to unpick some of the lessons that you've learned throughout your career, both in the Royal Air Force and subsequently. So I'll start off, as I do with all of my guests, and ask you what inspiring leadership looks like to you.
I think authentic has got to be the one word that I would say above all else, actually. And I think when we look at leaders, either in the political spectrum or personal leaders that we know, the ones that we tend to admire the most are ones that actually are truly authentic, that there's a transparency to their leadership as well. There doesn't feel like there's a hidden agenda. It feels that they're being true to their own values and that they share those values with you. And I think that's so important from the outset for people to almost put that out there, almost like their own personal brand, and then people can buy into that brand.
I suppose in terms of a personal brand, I suppose it starts with awareness of how you yourself operate, doesn't it, I suppose?
Yeah, it does actually. And it's been interesting for myself actually in my own leadership journey, really, to see how I've developed different leadership skills and how I've looked at my own brand or how I come across to other people, really, and thought, how do I want to change that? How do I want to tweak it? And often the best way of doing that is by finding someone that we aspire to be like, picking out the qualities that you think, I love the way they do that. And actually you then start to tailor your own leadership style and fit in with that.
So I'm curious then, Mandy, because you were the second ever female Tornado pilot. And I think there's been 5 in total. So what inspired you to go and take that journey?
I basically fell into flying when I was 14. I joined an air training corps, young cadets, and they basically showed you a small snippets of what life would potentially be like as in the Royal Air Force. And you also flew while you were there. And it was when I flew that I literally thought, oh my goodness. And it just felt like the pennies were dropping into place for me. And suddenly I was sort of defining a purpose that I probably hadn't had until that moment. And, it's a really great message for youngsters when you're at school level, because I think so often we have no idea what we want to do, but it's because we don't have that much exposure to different things, isn't it? So, when we say, oh, do work experience, as adults, we encourage youngsters to do these things. And people, I can't be bothered, or I don't want to do that. I have 2 teenagers, so I'm really in that language zone. Then actually, you're never seeing what you like to do. and it's until we have a definitive purpose, then we don't have a drive as to why we're doing something. And so once I gained my purpose through flying with the cadets, then I could set a specific goal to achieve.
I suppose in looking forward to role models, when you learned to be a pilot, how many female role models were there in say the RAF, etc.?
None. Yeah. What can I say? I'd love to say, oh yeah, lots. I mean, I wasn't the first one. So there was a lady called Jo Salter, who was the very first female fast jet pilot in the Royal Air Force. But because she was sort of within the system, I knew she was there and I knew she was doing it, but she was not necessarily someone that I was in touch with. You know, I was just, and I think once you're in a system and you're going through it, you're not thinking that you're very special or you're doing anything different, because you're just one of the course. I wasn't like I thought I'm the only woman. I never really thought like that. I just thought I was part of the team, part of the course, you know, one of the guys, in a really positive way. I mean, not just fitting in. And all I ever had from them was encouragement. So I never really thought, oh, I'm really pioneering here. That wasn't what I was thinking at all. I was thinking I love flying and I've had a wonderful opportunity to do it.
In terms of your career, I've just got some fake figures here. I've been doing a little bit of homework here, Mandy. I know, yeah, I'm really chuffed myself, actually. I don't do it for everyone. So I've got but you've done 3 tours of duty, flew 45 missions over Iraq, and you spent 17 years in the RAF and logged almost 2,000 flying hours. So within that huge context, if you had to pick out a couple of sorties or a couple of incidents, what would they be?
Defining moments. One defining moment was when I was about to fail flying training, and I was 3 trips away from gaining my RAF wings, and I failed a flight. And if it hadn't been for my course mates taking me out, cycling around a parade square, pretending to be on bikes, then I would never have passed the course. And when I look at that moment, that defining point, basically what they were doing was giving me cognitive diversity. And I think so often we focus, don't we, on cultural or gender diversity. They were saying, actually, you've been focusing on the wrong thing. And I had been fixated on detail, numbers, how many degrees. I was not seeing this bigger picture. They went out on bikes and went, just feel the flow of it, Mandy. You know, 2 people cycling up and down this big parade square, yelling 30 left and 60 right. And actually, it just seemed simple. And when I translated that into the air, I passed with flying colours. And if I hadn't had that moment and that unselfish behaviour from a fantastic supportive team, then I would never have gained my RAF wings. So that was a really defining moment. And then I've had a few incidents. One was on an operational tour when we were engaged by a surface-to-air missile over Iraq, and I was leading a mission. We managed to evade the missile by putting out our flares as a decoy. And then actually the complexity of the mission escalated enormously. And as a junior team member within that squadron, but also within that formation, but I was leading. And the thing about the military is that once you're tasked to lead a mission, you continue to lead the mission regardless of then what happens. You don't get your boss, who happens to be your number 2 in the formation, saying, I'm taking over. And the leadership growth that you experience because of accountability in your decision making, and about, you know, actually the empowerment that you get from that is enormous in your own personal growth. So those are probably 2 of my most defining moments.
Let's just unpick the second one a minute. So you've been fired upon, and you were leading the sortie. So how many planes were in that?
So within my immediate formation, there were 4 aircraft. We were what's called a 4-ship of aircraft. But over Iraq at the time, we were flying with a coalition. Can't give you a definitive number, but it would probably be around about 80 aircraft. And the rules of engagement sat at that point that once an aggressive act is made towards any one of the coalition aircraft, then our rules of engagement changed completely. And then you were often tasked to carry out a response option on a target. In other words, prosecute an attack on a target. So the second this aggressive act is made, we evade the missile, we radio through what's happened, and we're told to stand by. You're running out of fuel, you've been airborne for 4 hours, it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're waiting. So you utilize that time to set in place a decision-making program in your own mind, utilizing your team members to come up with a better decision, which is what we did that night.
So someone fires upon you, you're leading it, even though you're not the most experienced person in that team. So what's going through your mind at that point?
Well, firstly, thank goodness I've evaded the missile, because that was quite important for longevity of life. So I was quite relieved on that one front. But basically, interestingly, once we had evaded the missile, when we radioed through what had happened, this whole thing of stand by, one thing that we're taught to help us make really good quality decisions is a decision-making model called DODA, and it's utilized across the whole of aviation now, because it stops people procrastinating on decision-making. So the first thing that you do is you diagnose the problem. Now, that might sound simple, but if you have got people in different aircraft, you're not physically in touch with them, and they see a problem, you don't all have the same experience, the same mental map is not being formed. And actually, they could see a problem as a very different problem to the one that you're seeing. So rather than, contaminating your formation with what you see as a problem, you put it out to your team and you say, what is the issue? They will come back with their input. Now, if it agrees with yours, you're on the same page. So it's a really important starting point. You then ask your team to come up with options, again, not contaminating them with your thoughts, by basically saying, you've got 2-3 minutes. What are your options? They will come back with their input. And they did on that occasion. The options were, we need to head down and find an air-to-air tanker, which will increase our capacity to stay airborne for longer, because we will be able to pick up fuel from the air, and actually it will give us options. So now I've got better plans. We had thought, right, we've got exactly enough fuel to get from where we are to a target. So I'm coming up with a different plan. They have seen something differently. Brilliant. We've got better thoughts now. Then you make a decision. So you take the input from your team, and you as the leader make a decision. So it's not a collaborative decision making. It's option generated by a team, but the decision sits with you and your navigator. Then you assign tasks and you review it. I like to think as give me a reason not to. So you might have gone through the whole process and say, right, give me a reason not to carry on this, pursue this course of action. And that's where we were up to. So yeah, by going through that decision-making process, it's involved everybody. It's not contaminated anyone with your own thoughts. And you've come up with a better solution, asking the team as well.
But in that particular example, that happened over the course of minutes, isn't it?
Yeah, so it was probably around about 6-7 minutes to make that decision to head towards the tanker. And then heading down in the middle of the night, finding a tanker, and then finding out it wasn't our British one because ours had broken and it had been replaced by an American tanker, and I wasn't clear to tank from that one. So now as the leader, what am I going to do? So again, it's about thinking outside the box, saying to my boss, sir, I'm not clear to do this. I've never, ever done it before. I've just been shot at. I'm leading a mission and it's pitch black. Is this the time to try something new? And he said, well, have a go. And literally I had 2 attempts to refuel and I wasn't successful. And so it's about accepting as well that sometimes you might try things. And even if you're the leader, you don't just pursue it, to the counter balance of nobody else being able to achieve the target. And that's exactly where I was at, that I hit a moment where I thought, if I do carry on, it's going to prevent the rest of my team from actually completing the mission. So I moved across, I allowed my boss, my number 3, to refuel. They went back into Iraq and located the target, and I didn't. I landed back at home, back at my base with my number 4 in the formation, because you always go as pairs, and I felt like a failure. And again, it was about suppressing those negative thoughts, to think, oh, you're no good, you haven't completed the mission, to actually think, actually, it's when we hold the debrief, and we always debrief everything, and we run through this funnel, sort of what happened, the facts, why, the cause, but how can we be better? And it's about trying to get to that cure. And it's only by running through the debriefs where you can really, it's not a post-mortem, it's a really positive experience, because you're trying to improve team performance. You're not just analysing it for the sake of being critical. And it was going through that it was that reflection period to realise that you have done well, you have led a mission which had a successful outcome as far as the campaign that we were involved in. But at the same time, you have learned a lot about yourself.
Those reflections reminds me a little bit on, of course, a very much smaller example of, say, in education, a lesson that you deliver, and then you reflect on it afterwards. You do lots of reflection in all these teacher training, etc. So in terms of what that looks like in the RAF, that debrief, can you just take us through some of these the questions or the structure of it, Mandy?
Yeah, sure. So basically, we always do it immediately afterwards.
Yeah.
So I have heard different things actually and different techniques used. But there's firstly the group debrief where, you know, you outline the facts. Now, everyone has a slightly different memory of the timeline, for example. So you almost establish the facts and say, we can't debate these are facts. So with this timeline that we've picked up, let's try and pick up 3 or 4 elements that through really good facilitated questioning, really good open questions, and never focusing on who did that, what, always taking it back. It's not about the who, it's about what. So as soon as you find yourself going down that who route, you refer back and say, actually, what enabled that to happen? Or where was this happening? So that you're never focusing on a feeling of blame towards an individual, because then there's no learning. And once you back off that who and you're back into that broader thing, you then try to utilize those 3 or 4 key elements to come out with an actual takeaway as something to do as a positive, like we need more of that. It might be a negative, right? We need less of that. And, you know, how can we grow? So that's the sort of classic debrief funnel that we would use. And also another technique I've seen is where we then would grab somebody. If you saw somebody doing something specific, you think, Nicholas, can I have a quick chat with you outside of this? And it's called, I want to give you a boost. And it's a one-to-one feedback, but it's not waiting for that 360 appraisal. It's not, and this is perfect for teachers, you know, whereby often there'll be somebody in the room or, you know, and you just think, oh gosh, you could just tweak it by making it so much. And it's that balanced positives and negatives, observed behaviors at that time. So not going, oh, you know what, you've been doing that for years. It's actually observed. It's objective. They might be their best friends or they might not like the person, but do you have the ability to be objective, specific and timely? Again, so you're concentrating on a specific aspect that someone can take away from that boost. And that's worked really well as well, because even the word boost, it feels like you're not saying, Nicholas, can I give you some feedback? And people go, oh,
here we go. Yeah.
Oh gosh, feedback. It's not a gift. It's not a gift. I hate it. You know, and it's hilarious. People say, you know, feedback. But if you say, can I give you a boost? You go, yeah. Thanks. So you're priming your mind to accept a positive conversation. And very much we try to focus on facilitated techniques for that, not instructional. I'm not saying, Nicholas, when you did that, that was what happened. I said, when this happened, oh, you tell me what happened at this point, what was going through your mind. So you're telling me what happened, never instructional.
And I'm really curious because you just explained this, and it's really fascinating about feedback. You've just come back off a sortie, you've been shot at. How fast were you travelling on those in the Tornado?
You're travelling probably between 500 to 600 miles an hour at that point.
Okay, and so you had some G-force when you were evading the...
Yeah, a lot of G-force. I mean, for the Tornado, not as much as some aircraft, but it's often heavily loaded up with weapons. But you could be pulling up to probably 4G at that time, so not masses.
Okay. Are you kind of blacking out at that point, or is that...
No.
Okay.
So you have a G-suit that you wear, which basically is an inflatable bladder that goes onto your legs. And whenever you pull G-force on the aircraft, the bladder automatically inflates and it compresses your blood vessels in your legs, and it keeps the blood up in your upper half of your body, i.e. your brain, so that you don't black out.
Okay. So you've got all that going on, then you land. I mean, I've had stressful days at work, Mandy, and had debriefs, but that seems like a different level. So you've had all that, the adrenaline must still be there, but then you still debrief straight away. Yeah.
Every single time, training or operational. I don't think I've ever flown a trip where we haven't debriefed it. Okay. Even if it's just flying along in a little civilian aircraft, you know, afterwards we'll say, any points for me? How could we have done that better? You know, what went well, what went badly, what do we need more of? You know, there's the whirlwind debriefs that you can have. Obviously, you don't have to have a in-depth debrief every single time, but sometimes having a whirlwind debrief, you know, is really, really powerful too.
And in terms of things like team building, which you've kind of touched on, Mandy, in the cockpit, you've got someone behind you.
Yeah. So the Tornado is, for anyone that's watching this on video, No, that's the one. Yeah, there's a two-seat aircraft. So you have a pilot in the front seat, and then you have, in my day, they were called navigators, and then they became renamed as weapons systems operators, because it was more relevant that job title actually represented what they were doing, because of course technology had improved so much that they weren't just keeping the navigation kit in line, they were actually doing a lot more. In fact, to the point where I often used to describe myself as being the taxi driver to get them to where they needed to be to do the job, which, you know, is quite people always think it's about the pilots, but actually if the pilots can get the weapon systems operators to the right place, then ultimately they're the guys, you know. But also what you can do by having that is a really powerful learning tool. So you can have differences of experience levels. So you can have a very junior pilot and you will then have a very senior navigator. And often what you find is you might have a squadron boss who is wing commander of his squadron, and he will choose to fly with the most junior pilot on the squadron. Interestingly, so that not just you've got a huge hierarchical gradient, because that's not what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve a synergistic cockpit, not a flat gradient at all, because you have a very unusual scenario whereby the person in the front seat is the captain of the aircraft because you are the pilot and you're flying it. Ironically, the person in the back seats got 20 years of flying experience, but they're not the captain of the aircraft. So you got this very unusual scenario, perhaps on hierarchical gradients. But what I found in my experience was that this was a really powerful learning tool for mentoring. So you imagine having a mentor sitting 2 meters behind you at all time. Well, that enables your growth to happen so much quicker.
I'm curious again about how you develop that relationship with the person behind you. Is there anything that you go through to elevate that teamship?
Well, one thing that I would say about the military is, of course, when you go away, you are living, breathing, you know, sleeping under the same roofs, not literally, but in a positive way. And so you're spending all your time with these people. So it's not like a normal working environment whereby we all go to work or don't in the last year, and then we go home. Actually, you're with these people. So you're going to build up a camaraderie very, very different to the norm. You've also going on detachments, which are really good fun. So there's a social attached to a detachment whereby you're now seeing people outside the workplace. You might have adventure training, which you all go to, which is going to be from canoeing down the Ardèche to skiing trips. Again, something that they really focus on in the military is adventure training. Why? Because it builds up team spirit and team camaraderie very, very quickly. And I think even if you think about the education sector, if there's ever been a school trip, the camaraderie is really high within a year group or within a group of teachers, because they've now got a shared experience. And I think it's about that shared experience that actually enables a team to grow so much quicker.
It's really interesting because it's like you say, you've got the hierarchical structure that exists in the military, but that's very flexible depending on who you're working with in different situations. It's really, really fascinating stuff, that. So how does that then equate to some of the stuff that you're doing post RAF, Mandy?
Yeah, so when I left the Air Force, I made a really big assumption. All pilots, well, let me say 99% of pilots in the Royal Air Force, when they leave, become airline pilots, because you make an assumption you have a skill set. I made exactly the same assumption. I did all my licenses to become a commercial pilot, you know, at the cost of sort of £20,000. It's not a cheap course to do. And I held this license and I thought, I don't want to do it. My heart was sort of sinking. And I had 2 little children at the time, who were 5 and 6. And I just thought, gosh, if I go into the airlines, my husband's an airline pilot, then how are we going to make this work as a family? And this is why I think it's really important that we look at where we are at in our own stage of lives. And Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, she has this wonderful analogy that life is no longer a career ladder, it's a jungle gym. And I just always go back to that, because sometimes you're climbing up the ladder and it's great and you're feeling like, fantastic, I'm focused, I'm on track, I'm in my ladder. And then occasionally you find yourself hanging onto a cargo net, really making sure that your hands are pretty strong, that your nails aren't breaking, because you don't want to land in the ball pit. And it might be a sideways move, but that's fine for you at the moment. And when I left the Air Force, I thought, actually, I've got to be true to my heart here. And I had a really fortuitous, I joined as a volunteer reservist to fly cadets. And the reason I did that was A, I wasn't quite ready to hang up my flying boots, but also I went into this building and I looked at this board, and the board had all the pilots on it, say 20 pilots, all there, all retired generally, to fly cadets. Every single one was a man. And I thought, I cannot have young girls coming into this environment. They're all fantastic pilots, by the way, and I love them all. And they're all really inspiring, but there wasn't anyone that was a woman. And I thought, I need young girls to be coming in and seeing women doing this, because I don't want them just to be assuming that women don't do this. You cannot be what you cannot see. And I just thought, you know what? So I signed up as a volunteer reservist. I flew cadets, and I flew this young girl called Emily. And she turned out to be the best pilot I've ever flown with in a raw, natural state. And she wasn't very enthusiastic to start with. And I thought, oh, for goodness sake, I'd have half an hour with this girl. And I'll be honest, my heart was falling. I was thinking, oh gosh, I was like, how are you? Fine. It's that sucking of energy. I live with teens. And basically at the end, I said to her, you are brilliant. Is this something you might want to do? And she looked at me and she suddenly said, this is all I've ever wanted to do, but I was so scared I wasn't going to do well. I decided not to show you. I was interested not to try. And I thought, how many of us do that? That it goes back to what I was saying at the start, me finding my purpose, that actually ultimately, if we don't try, we don't know what we're good at. And if we don't engage in things, well, we don't know what the opportunities are that are out there. And in her mind, she just kept on thinking, I want this so much. If I give it 100% and then I fail, that's going to be hideous. So I'm going to not try, because in the back of my mind, I'll always be able to blame it on, yeah, well, I didn't try that much, so that's why I wasn't very good. And it was just a really befitting moment for me, because it was in that moment I thought, actually, I need to go into something whereby I can encourage youngsters into this, not into flying necessarily, but into believing in themselves, to grasp opportunities with both hands. And so that's when I actually decided that rather than just going into the airlines, I could make a difference as a speaker. I was invited to speak at an event, rather through a drunken dinner party conversation, actually. And it basically enabled me to write a really, really great speech called Choose Your Flight Path, because ultimately we don't need to be defined by our past. We don't need to be defined by where we thought we were going to go. It's about looking outside of that and thinking, do you know what? I need to start following my heart as to what I want to do. And the last 10 years have been an amazing period of growth for myself, and to be able to share my story with people from all over the world in a lot of education settings as well, from head teachers conferences to students, to primary school students, who always ask the best questions, by the way.
They don't hold back, do they?
They don't hold back. There's nothing they're not going to ask. Like,
yeah, exactly right.
Can you land on a roof? So it's been brilliant for that respect. And it's been really great for myself just to realize that we don't have to be categorized. We don't have to be put into a box.
It's strange that my grandfather was in the RAF, and he was a navigator. He used to say that's where the real money's earned, in the technical. And he was a navigator in Lancasters, and he was shot down after the Tirpitz raid, and he crash landed, or the Lancaster crash landed in northern Sweden, and the remains are still there. So for his 80th birthday, my father took him up there to look at this in the middle of this bog in northern Sweden.
He survived.
He survived, yeah, he survived.
Wow.
And he always used to say, the navigator's where all the money is, as I said, but he kind of, once he lived off that, but he used that throughout the rest of his life. He did speeches. He was in 617 Squadron. He wasn't the damn buses, but the dead damn buses. But that kind of gave him an identity. And you hear a lot about, sports people, etc., coming out of a career and trying to reinvent themselves. So how hard has that been for you, Mandy? Because you've got this fantastic kind of stories, pedigree, identity in the RAF, and sort of transitioning out.
To begin with, it was a little bit harder because, of course, nobody knew who I was or what I'd done. And then really over the last 10 years, I've just grown that as a brand almost. And sort of going back to what I was talking about at the start when we were talking about leadership and what is a leader to yourselves, it's about recognizing that you are your own brand, and you've got to be very true to your own values and what you do. And it was very interesting recently because I did an interview for a big YouTube channel, and it didn't actually sit ironically within who I am and my brand. And ironically, I got a lot of, let's say, misogynistic comments that came through on the YouTube channel, because it was going out to perhaps a lot of more, laddie type people. And it was fascinating because I thought, gosh, I hadn't really exposed myself to that sort of level of trolling and that side of things before. And I was actually I was having a conversation with my husband today about it, about pinpointing what it was. And he said, but it wasn't really on brand for you, Mandy, to do that. You haven't exposed yourself. You were very corporate or education. And actually you were putting yourself out to a very different audience. And the reason I did it was because I wanted to reach a lot of younger people. But actually, by doing so, you were signing up and exposing yourself to perhaps getting these sorts of comments from these people that feel the need to, destroy something that's good out there. But yeah, and how they actually found the transition. I mean, initially, yeah, tough, but it's just gradually built and built and built. And I think this year, the irony is that when COVID hit and we went into lockdown in the UK in March last year, the events industry died a death for 6 months. And I was sitting there thinking, gosh, I have no career and I can't see it coming back in the foreseeable future. The irony is that it came back for myself. I launched my book and I utilized that time in those first 3 months to finish this book that I'd had on the go for 4 years, because I've never had time to do it because it was a too big a job for me to do. So I always just put it to the bottom of the pile, procrastination and all that, thief of time. And actually, getting that out there really has embedded myself in the speaking world even more, because actually, it's being able to share that story, and I've just hit audiences that I never thought I would in a much broader spectrum. And so, yeah, I'd say at the moment, and the other thing that's been really lovely for myself, Nicholas, was when I left, I retrained in human performance factors. So basically, looking at why aeroplanes crash, I hate to say it, and it was nearly always down to human error. So 3/4 of the time, human error. And so how do we minimize that human error? And they realized that the only way they could do that was by educating the crews, not just the pilots, but the cabin crew, air traffic controllers, maintenance staff, so the whole crew resources, and educating them in cultural change, in getting away from a blame culture, in talking openly about mistakes, in how do we get rid of hierarchical gradients, especially in different areas of the world, whereby perhaps, you never challenge a senior, you never challenge authority. We need you to. We need you here to have a voice to challenge if you see something going on. No, we can't. And so how do you give them the tools and the techniques to do that? And it's something we've really worked on in aviation. Well, guess what? I left the Air Force and I was doing my speeches, and then businesses would say, yeah, we want something around culture. I'm like, got that. Yeah. Doing that in aviation. Something around leadership. Yep, got that one. And so actually, when I say translatable lessons, every lesson in leadership, in aviation, is so translatable to business, education sectors, because we're all individuals and we're all humans. We all make mistakes. So actually, if we're wanting high performing teams, it's sometimes about actually having the right culture to embed those.
It's really interesting you say that. I mean, I'm doing a lot of work at the moment around coaching, but not just one-to-one silos and having sort of trenches of specialization, but actually talking and not being isolated and connecting, which I think has been a huge, as you mentioned, Mandy, a huge bonus of the last year. There's been so many negatives, of course, but people have maybe coming together who wouldn't have naturally come together previously. And I think there's such a massive scope and need for people to connect, whatever the sector is and cross-sector. And I think it's about having a look at those interactions and where you can make those connections. So, for example, me and you speaking today, for example, then we'll speak to somebody else and off you go. And I think just that sharing of best practice and things is just really, really important.
Yeah, and if you want to look at the positives that have come out of the environment we're in at the moment, those are exactly them. Because it means that if you want to connect with, people from a huge organization, but they're normally disjointed because they're in different countries, for example, well, then it's not a problem. It's now an accepted medium, to do it on Zoom. I mean, if you were to say, oh, Mandy, you're going to speak to a school, but by the way, would you mind just doing it on Zoom? people would have laughed a year ago.
Yeah.
Whereas now they're going, oh, absolutely, we'll get everyone
Yeah.
on Zoom. That'd be perfect. Great.
Yeah.
So it is, I think there are some real positives that have come out of this.
I suppose going back to your analogy of that gym, that jungle gym, where do you find yourself at the moment in relation to that?
So I think so. You've also got to look at where you are at within your life as a whole as well. And I would say I'm sort of on the very, very personal growth stage at the moment. So my teenagers are 16 and 17. It's been challenging in lockdown. You know, I don't want to, you know, pretend it's been all sweetness and roses. It's not, you know, firstly, because they had a tiger mother that suddenly appeared out of nowhere, who was suddenly around and was going, why aren't you working? And they were like, you've never been on my back before. Why are you like now here all the time? I'm going, I've got your Teams. I've downloaded it. I can see exactly the work you're doing. They're like, stop over controlling us. And I realized in that first lockdown I was, because of course I needed something to fill the gaps that had been created in my life, and I was doing it by transposing that onto my children.
Yeah.
It didn't work. It did not work. It was literally it could have been a fist fight, you know, when considering I'm the smallest in my family now, that's not a good position to be in. So in this last lockdown I've completely backed off, and I've been supportive mum, helpful mum, but I haven't been on my case. And actually it's been a much more pleasant learning environment. It's meant though that because my boys are a bit older, I have the ability to focus perhaps on my own career again now. And although that has been growing in the background, and I have a really supportive husband as well, that has enabled me for us to coordinate if I have travel overseas. And I do a lot of speeches in Europe. So we managed to coordinate our lives pretty well. And actually now I'm sort of really looking to expand my own knowledge into different sectors as well. So, I mean, for example, an area I'm really passionate about is STEM. It's about getting, you know, young girls into this sort of world from a very early stage. So although I'm on the board of trustees for different charities, actually one I would really like to focus on perhaps is that, I don't know, more the STEMettes, you know, young girls, you know, positive role models, inspiring the future. So I am often on the lookout for things that sit within, again, going back to my personal brand and my own personal values. And I think it's about finding that areas of growth in the areas that you want it to be.
Yeah, that's really insightful, Mandy. A couple of questions for you here, as I was to sort of start to bring the interview to a cadence. Is who has most inspired you on your career journey?
I've had lots of different people, I think, at different times. And I wouldn't say career journey particularly, but I think my mum was a very pivotal person initially, because she was a single mum. My mum and dad divorced when I was young, and I'm really close to my dad. So he's also been a really strong influence from resilience, determination to succeed. My mum on, if it's going to be anyone, why shouldn't it be you? Philosophy. Work hard and you can achieve your goals. And so she brought up two young ladies. My sister is medical director of a hospice. I've done okay for myself. And yet we've got this incredible support from her still of, you know, it's such a close-knit unit, the three of us. And I think having that as a backdrop has really helped me. And it's basically taught me that anything is possible and not to be fearful. Everything from holidays in a caravan as a young lady, my mum used to tow this caravan to France, you know, and not be fearful. And so when I left the Air Force and I had a, you know, 5-year-old and a 6-year-old, I said, well, I've got a caravan, I'm going to just take it down to France. Every friend said, you can't do that. That's awful. I mean, my husband would fly out and join me at different points, but I was doing the towing and setting up. And they were like, you know, help from your children. What happens if you have a breakdown? I was like, stop putting your fears and your concerns onto me. You know, I've had a role model that did that. So why shouldn't I be able to do that? And people basically have the backdrop of where they're at, and they want to input that onto you. And I get a lot of young girls contacting me at the moment saying, thank goodness I've read your book, Mandy, because, you know, not just I wanted to be a pilot, but actually a lot of people are telling me I can't do this or I shouldn't do that. And I've read your book and I've realized I can do it. And actually it's so refreshing to read about such a positive story of hard work and determination, that we can achieve our goals with hard work. So I think my family have been very influential. I think my husband's an incredible role model as well of support. because I probably haven't had that many people realistically within the Air Force, actually, because there weren't, I'd love to say, oh, it was, this boss or that boss. I mean, I've had some incredible support throughout that time. But there are people that I think I meet that I just think, I love that, how you work, or I love that style about your leadership. And, and I'm sort of like this sponge, and I pull out the bits that I like from each of them.
It's interesting you say that. I've had a read of your book, which is an excellent book, by the way. And you mentioned it about one interaction with you in the RAF saying, it's been brought to my attention that you're very Amazonian in nature, but you're not particularly feminine.
Oh, joy. Yeah. I might get that made into a t-shirt.
I tell you what, it'd be a bestseller.
Oh, don't. I mean, it was another world. And the nice thing about the book is that I joined in the 1990s, and the Air Force is a very different place to how it was then. But yeah, I wasn't allowed to drink pints. And he said after this interview, and he said, you're Amazonian, you need to be more feminine. And I said, look, I don't even drink pints, And he said, yeah, but you always do order 2 halves. And I was like, absolutely, why would I not? So in fact, it's quite funny on social media. I often get people just literally posting 2 half pints.
Nothing needs to be said. In terms of what feedback has most fueled your learning, do you think, Mandy?
Oh, often we focus, and this is a human nature thing. We focus, doesn't matter how many positive comments you get, it's the one negative one that you dwell on, and you go over and over, you ruminate about it. And I think it's just the way that we are as human beings, isn't it? We can't help ourselves but hone in. So I'm very lucky. I've got a lot of support out there, and I've spoken to some amazing organizations, and I tend to get very positive feedback. And it was fascinating because when I was trying to get my book published, I got a literary agent straight away, and I thought, oh, Mandy, you're up and running. And then we contacted lots of these publishers, and we got this one rejection letter which said, plain books are for a male readership who have no interest in a woman's story. And when I read it, oh my goodness, it was like a red rag to a bull. It completely fueled me to actually self-publish, because I just thought, I have spent years not being put into a box, not being categorized. Why would anyone assume that just because a woman's journey is there, that it would not be of interest to a man, and a man's journey would not be of interest to a woman? It's a journey about, it could have been called aspiring and achieving your dreams, or like my motto is, dream it, believe it, do it. It could have been any of those things. And yet they'd focused on the fact that plain books are for a male readership. And actually that has not been the case. I would say probably 80% of, maybe 70% of my readership have been males who have normally always contacted me on one platform or another and said, oh, we love your book. Oh my goodness, this is the best book. It's just so refreshing to read it from a woman's perspective that's not stepped in machoism. It's just a true real life representation, and it's refreshing. And I think, you know what, it just goes back to my whole, don't put me in a box, don't categorize us, actually let us just grow. So that was probably the best bit of negative feedback that fueled me on.
Yeah. And lastly, what piece of advice would you give a younger you?
To believe in yourself against all odds. So when you're younger, you don't realize just what potential that you have inside yourself. And I think so often when something happens, we get a knock, we take it personally, and then we become, introspective about that, and we start reflecting on it, and then we get that whole imposter syndrome where we start talking ourselves out of things. If you were to say, where's the proof? Where's the proof that I can't do it? And actually translate that into, well, maybe I can do it. And my goodness, if I can do it, I need to believe in myself that I can. And I think accepting that belief from other people as well, because again, I grew up in a world whereby a boyfriend would say, you look nice. And I go, oh, don't be silly. He said, please just take the compliment. You look beautiful this evening. And I'd go, oh, no. And it's accept the compliment when someone says something, accept the help. So when this boss of my university air squadron wanted to challenge the system when I failed all the aptitude tests to be a pilot, if I'd have said, I don't want your help because I'm not very good after all, because actually I proved it because I failed all these tests, then ultimately I would never have had the job I've had. He believed in me. So accept that help when someone believes in you and sees it. Take that belief and allow it to grow and blossom within yourself.
It's interesting. I was reading an article recently about Oprah Winfrey, and someone said, well, no, what got you to where you got to in your career? And she went, I asked for what I wanted. I didn't hold back. And I thought that's just so simple, but it's something that a lot of us just don't do. We don't want to put our head above the parapet or ask for help, as you said, all these kind of things, you know.
And I am a big believer of putting things out to the universe as well. So, I mean, I do it all the time, you know, everything from I'd like to see my book made as a film or whatever it is, you know, I put it out to the universe and I actually live it as if it has happened. So when it does happen, I'm not sort of always shocked because I think, well, I put that out there. I was waiting for that to happen. And I always believe that you do things for a greater purpose. So it might be that, for example, when I did this YouTube channel I was talking about earlier, that I maybe not regretted it, that would be too strong a word, but I thought this it didn't sit 100% within my branding, but I did it for one reason, and actually something very good has come off that at the back. So things happen for a reason, and I'm a believer in that. Just if you've got that belief though in yourself, as Oprah Winfrey does, you know, of putting it out there and thinking, yeah, I mean, hence my motto, you know, dream it, believe. Can't get the right side, can I?
That one there,
dream it, believe it, do it. Because, you know, you have these dreams. If you actually truly believe them by visualizing them, allowing that dream to grow, it's when we don't do it, that's the problem. And that's the sticking point, that you have these things that are pie in the sky, but we never action them. So it's all about that, actually putting in place an action plan as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've really enjoyed speaking today, Mandy. And in terms of a film, I mean, I've really enjoyed your book, which you obviously can get on the usual platforms. But a film that'd be really interesting. You could play yourself, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, people have sort of said, you know, this would make a great film, Mandy. You know, who would play you? And I think, quite frankly, we should just put that one out on social media. I would love to. I might be really offended though. I always say Miranda Hart because we're very tall and slightly uncoordinated, and we share a very similar humour. But you know, everyone said, oh no, I think we need to think of different people. So yeah, it would be fun.
Did you still fly, do you, Mandy?
I'm not at the moment. No, I left the volunteer reserve 2 years ago in 2018, or just the end of 2018. And so I'd hung up my flying boots before COVID hit. But again, just through different avenues, I've been contacted by Women's Gliding and said, is this something you might be interested in? I was like, actually, yes, because I love the fact that it's slightly challenging in as much as you haven't got an engine. So that really appeals to me. And so bizarrely, just through social media, people have got in touch, and that looks like when we're out of lockdown, something around that might happen.
So back to the skies again.
Yeah, which would be wonderful.
Super. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Mandy. I've really enjoyed speaking to you, and thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedules as well.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Nicholas.
If you're interested in elevating your leadership practice in partnership with Pursue through our coaching and leadership development packages, or would like to connect to discuss any of the topics on the show, please send me an email at hello@pursue.com or visit our website, pursue.com. You can also follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter at Nicholas Mackay or Pursue. And if you enjoy the show, please leave a rating and spread the word. We are proud to be developing a truly global community. Take care. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.